welcome back to Food Prep Guide. If you vacuum seal food in any capacity, this video is for you. I want to cover 5 common vacuum sealing mistakes that can either lead to a failed seal in your bag over time, a failed seal in your jars if you're going to be vacuum sealing in mason jars, or simply a mistake that could cause the food inside of your container to just simply not remain as high quality as it could have. Let's go ahead and get started.
By the way, if you would like help building your food storage, scroll down to the description box of this video and click this link for our free 1-year food storage plan. We calculated a year's supply of food for one person, then broke that data down into a week-by-week list of items to build your pantry on a budget. We'll send it straight to your inbox. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss all of our upcoming food preservation, pantry storage, and gardening tutorials. Now back to the kitchen.
The first vacuum sealing mistake is not pre-freezing certain foods. If you've been vacuum sealing for any length of time, you have probably already discovered this for yourself. But a lot of your softer fruits, think about your strawberries and things like that. When you vacuum seal them, the pressure of that vacuum seal will kind of slightly crush them. And what happens to fruit that's crushed? Their juices come out. And when you go to take that out of the freezer or just eat it, take it out of your fridge and eat it, a lot of that juice that makes the fruit taste so good is now already out and in the bag. So that is something that I would recommend pre-freezing really soft foods that can have a tendency to get crushed inside of your bag. The other thing that I would recommend freezing is when you are going to be freezing anything that has a sauce type consistency. Now you can absolutely just put any kind of your sauces in a gallon size freezer bag, lay them flat and not even vacuum seal them and just store them that way. But one thing that is at the top of my mind, because this is something that I do in large quantities every year, and that is our homemade pesto. We grow basil in large quantities so that we can put up a year's supply of pesto each year. We use it in our pasta, we use it as a pizza base, and just as a sandwich spread. We are crazy about pesto. We can't can it because of its high dairy content and high oil, not dairy, high oil content. It does have some Parmesan cheese, so I guess that's dairy. But so we choose to freeze it instead. And I wouldn't even be able to really freeze these in single serve quantities if I didn't pre-freeze first. And that is really the benefit of pre-freezing things like sauces, pesto, things like that, is you can freeze in single serve quantities and just be able to open your bag and pull out 1 cube. Let me give you a closer look. You can see how they're kind of rounded, and that's because I use ice cube trays, the silicone poppable ice cube trays. I will try to find them and link those in the description box below if you're interested, but it has a silicone bottom and you're able to just kind of push that out and the cube plops out, and then I can transfer them into a vacuum seal bag. I don't have this on my list, but I just want to go ahead and mention it. We'll consider it a bonus, is that when you are vacuum sealing something that in portioned size items like this, I do highly recommend using a zip top bag instead of your typical bags that have to seal with your vacuum sealer, your standard vacuum sealer machine, and using one that has an air valve like this so that you can use another type of device like the WeVac, and you can use that to suck out the air so that you don't have to constantly lug out that big machine just to seal this every single time. If you use a zip top bag like this, all you have to do is zip it up and use this handheld machine, line it up over that, suck the air out, and back into the freezer it goes. It turns a chore that could take 5 minutes, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things, 5 minutes is not a big deal, but it's a lot better if it can take 30 seconds, right? Any busy mamas understand exactly what I'm talking about. So just a tip there, if you are freezing any single serve things, consider a zip top bag and a handheld device like this. Okay, moving on to vacuum sealing mistake number 2, and that is not using a barrier when vacuum sealing powders. Think about your dehydrated fruit powders. Maybe you make a super greens powder like we do, where you dehydrate kale and broccoli leaves and spinach and beet greens and all of that, dehydrate it and powder it. And what happens when you try to vacuum seal powders in a mason jar is that the vacuum sealer will suck up the powder in at the top and cause it to get trapped underneath the rim right here. All that powder will get like sucked up in there, and if you have any debris right here, you're not going to get a good solid seal on the rim of your jar. So one way that we can protect against that is by using a barrier. And before I discuss this any further, I do want to note that a lot of times I have found when you are vacuum sealing a powder, you might actually get a good seal in that moment and think that it's really good and sealed. But then you put it on your shelf thinking you're good to go for several months, and the next time you go to grab it, it's not sealed whatsoever. And that's because sometimes you can get a temporary seal that may hold for a day, it may hold for a few hours, it may hold for several days, but it's just long enough to make you think that it is good and solidly sealed, but really some powder debris got picked up during the suction process and blocked your jar from getting a good seal. So I recommend doing this even if you have in the past sealed powders and thought that you had a good solid seal. I go ahead and recommend that you go ahead and just put this in there for safekeeping, and then you know that you don't have any powder blocking your seal. This is a muffin cup liner, as you can see, but this isn't the only thing you can use. You can certainly use it's any kind of barrier, any kind of food safe barrier that you are okay with coming into contact with your food. It could be a folded up paper towel. It could be a piece of cotton flannel. It can be a piece of fabric. Just anything that can sit on top of the powder on your food. Let me get you a jar and show you. Okay, I didn't want to just try to explain that verbally. I'm not very good at that sometimes. Okay, so this is bell pepper powder. We had peppers coming out of our ears this year, just an absolute bumper crop. So I decided to take the very last bit of peppers that we had and just completely powder it. And I'm going to, these are red and green bell peppers, and I'm going to use this jar to make up a bunch of different seasonings. I'm going to play with them and come up with some all-purpose seasonings, some for chicken, and just play around and see what I can come up with. But anyway, you will take whatever barrier that you are using. For me, a muffin cup liner. It just seems like the easiest because it's already circular, just like the jar. I wonder if I can tip this without spilling it. But you can see why I love the muffin cake liner so much. You might need to press it against the jar some. But you can press that against the jar, and since it's round, just like your jar, you can get a good barrier between the powder and your vacuum sealer so that when you go and seal your jar, that powder cannot come up through here and block and you know, get on the rim and block your seal. So highly recommend using a muffin cup liner for sealing powders and stuff. I'll put that aside and seal that in just a minute. Okay, tip number 3, or vacuum sealing mistake, that's pretty common, and that is not leaving enough space in your bag to seal properly. I am really bad about this because I want to fit as much as possible in a bag, and I will have a tendency to overfill sometimes, but you want to leave 3 inches. Some people say 2 inches. I have left 2 inches before and still not been able to get a good seal. Honestly, it depends on how thick your food is down here and how much it's opening the bag. If it's something really thick like a 2 to 3 chicken breasts in one bag, that's gonna make it, you know, thicker and plump out a lot more. And you need more space for something like that versus some flat spinach leaves that can suction down really flat, and you could get by with 1 or 2 inches for that. But as a general rule of thumb, I give myself about 3 inches of space at the top to get a good solid seal on my vacuum seal bags. The other thing that can happen is if you don't leave enough space, I don't know what it is about the adhesive, and I think it probably, like I said, I think it has to do with how bulky your food is down here. But a lot of times what will happen is the bag, the top of the bag can just ever so slightly fold over and get pinched in the sealing process, like when I close down the lid. And if that happens, it's gonna seem sealed. You're gonna put it in your freezer, and 2 weeks later, it's gonna be full of air. And that is almost always because I overfilled it, and it was like this big bulky thing up here, and it just messes with this liner up top and makes it crinkle a little bit. So just want to mention that as well. The 4th most common vacuum sealing mistake that I have personally made is not inspecting your seal after you've sealed it. I have had a tendency, especially early on, to just seal it. It was good to go. I heard that sound. You know, if you've been vacuum sealing for a while, you know that there's a sound difference when it hits a good suction level. I had a tendency to really depend heavily on that sound difference, and I could hear that sound. I could tell it was sealed, and I would put it away and not even inspect it. But now I make a habit of really inspecting my seal area very well. before and after sealing. I don't know if I mentioned that, before and after. So before is when you are putting in your food, especially if it's any kind of liquid type food and you're putting it in there, it's just naturally going to rub against the top of the bag unless you are super duper helpful. I mean, not helpful, careful, or you have a second person holding the bag open and you can dip your hand all the way in there. But in general, as you are loading up your bag, it's just naturally going to rub and hit against this top layer. And if there is any, it's just kind of like canning. If there is any food residue at the very top where you're going to be sealing, which actually we're going to be leaving some room, so it's actually, seal's actually going to be down here. But if there's any kind of food debris, a crumb, or even, I'm picturing raw meat. You know how the chicken juice is like, can be really, it can be kind of thick and kind of sticky. If any of that juice kind of stays there, it can prevent you from getting a really good seal, or it can seem like the whole line is sealed, but then there's this tiny little bump right here where that food particle was, and that tiny little bump is enough to make it seem sealed, but then a few weeks later you go to your freezer and you find that the bag is full of air. And that's because I didn't inspect the seal properly before. Now, I also will inspect the seal line area after I have sealed it because of that bump effect that I was just telling you about. That if, let's pretend I inspected it really well, I thought I inspected it really well, but then let's say I missed something, a little tiny piece of juice or just a little teeny tiny chunk of fat from a piece of beef or chicken or something, and I go to seal it and I inspect the seal and there's something kind of trapped right there. And even though it seems sealed, the bag is vacuum suctioned, it's not going to be a long lasting seal. So the mistake I made early on was not investigating, not identifying the seal before and after sealing it. Okay, common vacuum sealing mistake number 5, and this is a very little known one, I think, and that is the mistake is vacuum sealing brown sugar. The right way is to not vacuum seal brown sugar, which is strange because we can vacuum seal sugar. I do it all the time. But what happens with brown sugar is it is mixed, of course, with molasses. And that molasses makes this sugar moist. And it is just moist enough to turn into a brick when it is vacuum sealed. Now, I have heard that some people still vacuum seal it in their mason jar, and because there's some air up here, they're saying it doesn't turn into a brick. I have had brown sugar sitting in a mason jar that's not been vacuum sealed and that has been vacuum sealed, and it still gets rock hard inside that jar. Now there are plenty of tricks and hacks for softening up hardened brown sugar. You can put a piece of stale bread inside your jar and that's can keep it softened. But as long as you just don't vacuum seal your brown sugar and use it within a pretty decent time frame, 6 months or so, you shouldn't be dealing with that rock hard brown sugar nature that's caused by the molasses. But vacuum sealing brown sugar will turn it into a brick, so do not vacuum seal it. Just a quick tip, brown sugar is simply white sugar and molasses. And it is extremely easy to make. We have a video on making, taking white sugar and turning it into 3 different types of sugars. I'll link that down in the description box below. But what we have done in our family is simply stocked plain white sugar in bulk and just keep like a gallon of molasses on hand. We get it from Azure Standard. The price per ounce is fantastic. And then whenever we want brown sugar, we can simply mix the two, and then it's not taking up more storage space in my pantry. I have actually, just a really quick tip, this is kind of off topic, but if y'all cook chocolate chip cookies, if you cook any kind of cookies that calls for brown sugar, I was out the other day when my husband wanted his favorite chocolate chip cookies that I make, and I was like, well, I'm just going to pour in the sugar amounts for both the white sugar and the brown sugar, and then I'll just pour in the molasses into the dough and not even make up the brown sugar first. It was one of the best batch of cookies I have ever made. And the only difference was putting in that fresh molasses instead of using brown sugar or even making it ahead of time. And so as long as I have the time, I am just gonna use fresh molasses in my cookies from now on because the taste was phenomenal. So if you make cookies and you've always used brown sugar, I highly recommend trying just using the white sugar and adding in the fresh molasses. And I'm telling you, you are going to be pleasantly surprised. Okay, y'all, I hope that was helpful to you, and I hope that helps you as you vacuum seal to get the highest quality food possible for as long as possible. That's all for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.